Building n8n workflows usually requires you to think through the triggers, the selection of nodes, the error handling, the logic behind it, edge cases, and everything there is. So what if you could just use plain English to build these kinds of flows, right? And this is exactly what the Build with AI feature from n8n itself is for. And I am going to challenge the AI builder today with different kinds of workflows, and we will see if this is actually just a gimmick or a really productivity weapon. Now, the start, or what we want to look at first, will be to look at the AI builder itself. And currently this is just available for cloud users, right? So this I'm on the cloud version right now. So if you're self-hosting n8n, then there is not a direct way to use the builder itself, but we can still use a lot of help from the n8n docs dynamically and interactively. And I'm going to show you how this works in a second. So this is obviously a blank canvas, right? So this is a newly created workflow, and I'm going to click on this Build with AI button right here, and then you can see that this is basically just opening a chat window, right? And now it's asking me what I would like to automate, right? And there are a couple of templates that you can use, and also an important part right here is that this is going to take or cost you credits, right? So based on or depending on the plan you're on, this will consume credits. So every time you send a message to the AI builder feature, this will cost you a couple of credits. Now, to separate this is a second feature, which is the ask function, right? This is not going to cost you credits in that regard, right? So you can basically ask the AI n8n feature if there or if it's able to basically help you in regards to building the specific flow that you have in mind, right? And then ask it about all the specific nodes. And this is a really helpful a partner, basically. Now, what you can also do is that there is a workaround for this, because as I've mentioned, these two features currently, first of all, are in beta, and second of all, they're only available via the cloud version. However, if you go into the n8n docs themselves, into the official n8n docs, then you have this button right here, which is called Chat with the Docs, right? And if you open up this, then you can see that this also gives you a chat window. However, this is also connected not only to the n8n docs themselves, but also to the n8n community, right? And there are a lot of helpful community posts. So if you are looking for community n8n.io, then you can see that there's a lot of knowledge floating around basically within there, right? And this specific chatbot, if you will, has access to the community feature as well, right? So if you are on the self-hosted version, then you can still use this workaround for this to basically ask the chatbot if it's able to help you. Now, what I have prepared is a document with the prompts that I want to test, right? So first of all, I have those three different kinds of use cases, right? So easy, medium, and hard. And we will take a look into the specific reason and the specific use case itself in a second. And each of those prompts is divided itself again into a really raw version, into a really just rough version, you know, that I just throw in there, not really think about any kinds of details. And then there's a second version, which is like the improved prompt. And this is where I'm giving the AI builder real specific instructions, what I want it to do, and what the specific features are supposed to look like, right? And as you can see, there's even a link to that specific node that I wanted to use, right? So if I click on this, then you can see that this is linking to the exact node within the n8n docs. Now, where does this improved prompt come from? And this is exactly the reason why I told you about the chat with the docs builder, right? Or the chat with the docs agent, if you will, right? Because this is exactly where this is coming from. So what I did was that I asked it that I want to have a prompt. So I want to build a flow that does the following. And I'm just pasting the raw prompt into this, right? And I'm now asking it, give me a detailed prompt for the AI builder, right? Then you can see that it is giving me really specific instructions that I can just copy and paste into the builder itself, right? So that I can basically be sure that it's picking the right nodes, that it's logically built, right? And that it's adhering to what I said, right? And it's even adding all the variables and the specific settings, right? So this is a two-step process, right? So I'm just I'm just thinking about a rough version or a rough idea what I want the flow to build. And then I can just throw this into the docs themselves or into the chatbot with the docs, and then it will just build the prompt for the AI builder for me. And then I can just copy and paste this one and then paste this one again into the build instruction itself. and then it will start building it, right? And we will take a look now what this looks like. So what I'm going to do is that I will just pick this, and for the time being, I'm just going to use the raw prompt of the easy use case for now, right? And we will just compare if there's actually a difference between the raw and the improved version of the prompt, right? All right, so this is just a daily weather notifier, and this is the raw prompt. I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to paste this right in here, and this is what I want the agent to do, right? And I'm just going to send it. And just like with thinking models within ChatGPT, for instance, the user interfaces, you can follow along the thought process that the AI builder goes through, right? And then you can see what it does and how it picks the specific actions, right? And then it will start to show up on the left-hand side. Now, it did pick the right nodes right now. Now it rearranged them. It's connecting the nodes. And now you can see, and I'm going to move myself out of the way here. Now we can actually see the specific instructions, right? So it has picked all the nodes and included all the settings. And now it's telling me how to set it up, right? So we have the workflow configuration node, which is basically the very first one. Set your notification preferences like the Telegram chat ID. So this is the chat ID that I have to use, right? Where the message should be sent, the email recipient, right? Where the email notification should be sent to. Then send to Telegram node, right? Connect your Telegram bot credentials, and then configure your SMTP credentials, right? These are the steps that I still need to undertake. Now, in regards to those to-dos, it's also quite nice because what this does is before I can actually execute and after that even refine it, it is giving me the option. If I click on this, then this is referring to the basically to-dos that I have to conduct to make sure that the settings are all correct, right? So if I click on this very first one here, then it's opening up the workflow configuration node, which is the very first one here, the very first action node right here. So it's opening this up, and then you can see that there are placeholders, right? And these have been populated by the AI builder itself, right? Just as with the email recipients. And this is quite convenient, right? Because this will just give me the information that I will just need to add some IDs, right? And then I will be able to send over the data. Now, in regards to the basically workflow configuration node itself, this is also quite nice and best practice because this will give us the flexibility to use all the credentials or, whatever variable we need within that flow to use later on. Now, this is fetching weather data. So let's take a look at this. It did choose OpenMedio, right, as the specific weather API, right? And if I look for OpenMedio, then you can see that there is actually no native integration, which does make sense then that it is choosing a manual HTTP request to that specific API because this is what we told it to, right? So I would have been skeptical if there was a native node for OpenMedio, right? Within n8n, I would have expected it to use this one, but apparently there is not that specific service. So we need to make a manual API call, and then it's even giving us the complete URL of OpenMedio, right? And we will obviously need to double check if this makes sense and if this adheres to the specific structure, but we can do this later. All right, so what I have done now is that I have first of all added the Telegram chat ID, and then I have added the email recipient right here, right? And now we can basically use those variables. Now, as for the trigger itself, this is also quite interesting because if you remember, I have told it that the user enters a city, right? But I didn't even specify where that should be, right? So where should it actually enter that data, right? And the builder chose the native n8n form, right? Which is a plausible assumption, right? So if I open this up, then you can see that I do get a production and a test URL, and this is where I can basically publish this very form, right? And where we can enter that data. And if I execute this, then you can see that it is actually giving me the correct input field, right? Which is city name, because this is what I wanted it to do, right? So I will just enter the city name and that's it. And it is a very plausible solution to choose this specific node. Now I will save this and let's just see if this flow actually works. So I'm going to publish this right here, and I'm going to open up the form and enter the city name. So let's take Berlin in Germany. I'm going to submit it. Form was submitted, and now it is actually doing things in the background, but apparently we received an error, right? And this is also quite interesting. So let's just see what happens. If I open this up, then you can see that the API call was not successful. And if I open this up, then we can take a look into the actual problem, which is that it didn't find, or that it didn't that it wasn't able to map and match the variable called city, which is supposed to be parsed into the actual value we received from the form, right, into the actual city name. And the reason being, obviously, is that, as you can see, that it called the parameter called city, right? However, within the workflow configuration, the parameter is actually called city name. This is interesting because this is something that it should have been aware of, right? Because the workflow configuration part is completely manual, right? So this is something that it knows what to do. And then that this does not match with what happened before is definitely interesting. So I'm going to fix this and let's see what happens. All right, so now I changed it to city name, actually, right? Because the field is called city name, and we're just going to run the flow again. All right, and now I actually did get some data back here. Now you can see that it has parsed the city name correctly, and this is the response I got from the API call. Now, this is actually really interesting because, as I've mentioned, this is a manual API call, right? So that it actually used the correct parameters and the correct structure to be able to productively and in a live system call this specific API. That's quite impressive. All right, so let's close this one and run the whole flow again and see if it's also able to send the messages. All right, now the Telegram message was sent, and I'm going to jump into my Telegram account right here. And now you can see that I just tested this a couple of times, and this is actually giving me the information. However, it does not actually contain the weather, so I will need to double check this again. However, the message itself was sent, and also sending the email did produce an error. I'm going to open this up, and I also already know what this means because it's using from email, and then it's basically using a random from email, which I obviously don't own because this is an official n8n address, right, or domain, and this doesn't work, right? Now, I'm not going to go into too much detail, but this is already giving you a slight idea, right, that there are a couple of problems with this, right? I mean, at the end of the day, it is still in beta, right? All right, now I'm going to open up a new flow, and this time we are going to use the next prompt that I've prepared, right? Remember, we just used the raw prompt right now, and now I'm going to use the improved prompt and just see how this works. All right, so we have our empty flow again. And I am going to copy and paste this prompt right now, right down here. Just going to paste it into Build with AI again. Paste it like this. Now it's not as beautiful. And by the way, it's also limited, I believe, to 5,000 characters, if I'm not mistaken. Let's see if this works. Yes, it does work. So obviously it's not as nicely formatted again. So using Markdown for this would have been a better option. I just chose it now because this can also confuse and decrease the quality of the LLM, or of the output rather. So we will need to tweak that as well. But let's just see what happens here. So it is thinking again. We have our notes. They got rearranged. And let's just see what we have to do now in regards to the setup. All right, and now it's done. And in regards to the architecture itself, it looks quite similar. It's not exactly the same. We do have, first of all, an error handler, which is quite nice, which obviously we told it to use, right? And then we have also the split in regards to the double check format weather message and then check notification channel. So there's a double check, rather an if node integrated into this, whether it meets a certain condition. And this does make sense in regards to the prompt itself. So let's take a look at our to-dos. Configure the workflow configuration node again, set the notification channel, and then configure the send email node and set up the credentials again. And as you can see down here, we have all of our to-dos again with the link to the specific node. So if I click on this one, then I have the same settings that I will need to conduct and to make sure everything's working. So I will just fill this out really quickly. And before I do this, you can also see that it did adhere to what I told it, right? Because I told it in the improved prompt. And by the way, you will get all the prompts and everything that I'm sharing here also within my school community. You will find the link down in the description. And so as you can see, it is using a manual trigger and then a workflow configuration and not a form node, right? Which was the trigger in our first flow. So so this is still adhering to what we told it, right? Because we explicitly told it that it's for manual testing. It does make sense to use a manual trigger node, right? So this is perfectly fine. Now, as for the second part in regards to the configuration, obviously we need to define the city itself based on this input right here, right? Based on this variable, because it does not come from the form, right? So this is something that we need to be aware of, that which is a difference in regards to what we told it before. And then also the channel, right? And this is what the later if node is for, because we are defining the channel basically where this notification should be published, right? So should it be a message via Telegram or should it be sent via email? And this is where the if node is coming from, right? So if I open this up, then this is basically asking whether the input from the previous node is equal to Telegram, and if that's the case, it's taking the true path, and otherwise it's taking the false path, right? So this is also something that we defined earlier. Now, in regards to the API for the weather API, let's double check this right here. And as you can see now, we are now using the same variable as before, right? So it's just called city and it's lowercase, right? But this actually matches to what we have defined in the workflow configuration itself. Because if I open this up, then you can see that we have the city defined right here, right? This is the city variable, which is lowercase and just called city, not city name as before, right? So these are like the nuances that we need to be aware of, where it does make sense to really tell it, right, on a specific basis, where it should be aware of all the complete context of the previous and the succeeding nodes. All right, let's take a look into the send email node, because this is one where we had previously the problem that it just used a random from email, right? So if I open this up, then now we can see that it is using a placeholder again, which was also part of our homework down here, right? Where it's actually telling us that we need to update the sender email address, right? It is explicitly telling us that we need to be aware of that fact, right? And this is a way better user experience because now it is aware of the fact that the previous address didn't make sense, right? And this is something that we can add right here now. All right, I'm going to save the flow right here. And now let's execute it and just see what happens. All right, and now we did get an error once again, and this time it's coming from the send email node again. So let's just see what happened here. And first of all, I already see the problem because as you can see, first of all, it complained that there are no recipients defined, right? And apparently the email address was, or the email recipient's address was apparently not defined again. Now, reason being is that it used this specific syntax, right? So the name of the variable is actually correct because it used lowercase email and then uppercase recipient, which is or does match the workflow configuration name of the specific variable. However, it did not use the whole path to the specific node, right, to the workflow configuration node, and this is why it gets confused. So if I drag and drop this in here, then you can see that it is actually adding the specific name of the node to make sure that it is also receiving the correct parameter from the specific node, right? Because this syntax only applies if this is coming from the very previous node, right? So from the very node that was before the one we are in right now. So this syntax does not work right here. And this is also something that it should have been aware of, right? All right, so I'm going to delete this as well. And then same problem right here, right? So it did call the right variable, but it did not use the whole path. So it did not actually find the correct city. So I'm going to delete this as well. And now I'm going to drag and drop the city right here. And now it's actually calling the correct city. All right, I'm going to save this and let's run it again. And now it is actually going through the correct path. All right, now I'm not going to get into too much detail because you can see that it is already quite tedious to go through all of these error messages, but you can already see, first of all, the potential on one hand, but also that you need to be really aware of all the little intricacies that can come up in regards to, you know, variable mapping and then choosing the correct syntax and then also referring to the correct nodes, right? So this is where the builder still needs improvement. Let's get into the medium use case. So I have created a new flow and I have opened up my doc right here, and I'm again going to use the raw prompt right here. And let's see what it builds. I'm going to go to build with AI again, paste it right in here, and let's just see what happens. All right, now here's our new flow again, and let's just see what our homework is right here. So first of all, it does not look too complex, but the most interesting part is definitely that we have an AI step involved right now. First of all, we need to add our credentials to Airtable, right? And remember, I told it that I wanted to insert the structured data into Airtable or base row. Now, what it's doing right here, that apparently it is using both, right? So both base row and Airtable, but this was actually meant just as, you know, either or. So this actually doesn't make sense because you want to have a single source of truth, right? And no duplicates. However, let's just see how it configured this. So the most interesting part, let's go from start to finish. So we have a new lead email, which does make sense because as the trigger, right? So we have an IMAP trigger right here. Then again, we have the workflow configuration. So this also does make sense that we take a look into this as well. And so we have manual mapping and then a lead quality threshold. This is quite nice. And then also an acknowledgement subject, which will be apparently used for the email itself later on, right? So that we have a subject for this. So this is definitely interesting and does make sense because we wanted it to classify the lead quality, right? And then to have a threshold. This definitely does make sense. Now, the next part is quite interesting because now we have AI involved. involved, right? So how did it set up this very node? Let's open this and just see. So the text that is supposed to extract the lead info from, and by the way, this is a information extraction node. So if you look for a new node, and then within AI we have the information extractor, right? And it even renamed this to extract lead info, which does make sense as well. All right, and then let's see what it is extracting from this text that will be coming from the previous nodes, right? So it's chose as the schema type from attribute descriptions, and the name of the first attribute will be a name, and then the full name of the lead. This definitely does make sense. Then we have the email, obviously, email address. Then we have the company name if mentioned. This is also quite nice that it even defines this in the description. And by the way, describing this attribute is quite important for the LLM to actually know and to reduce ambiguity in regards to extracting the correct parameters, right? So the description that was created by the agent or by the AI builder itself also makes sense. Then we have the phone number if provided, the message, main message or inquiry from the lead, and then the lead quality, right, which is referring to what we want to use as the qualifying parameter, right, as the qualifying data point, and then lead quality score from 1 to 10 based on completeness of information and urgency. And this also does make sense because as you can see, we are using a score from 1 to 10, right? And before in the workflow configuration node, it has used a lead quality threshold of 7, right? So it's basically 70%. So this makes sense, right? To use a system like this. And remember, we only gave it like a really rough prompt, right? So this is not defined at all. So the AI builder defined or decided to use this logic itself. Then we have the urgency level, low, medium, or high. And this also makes sense. All right, so this is quite nice. Let's close this. Let's take a look which model it chose. So this is connected to my account, and I believe this is like the default setting or my last setting. So GPT 4.1 mini is fine for now. All right, let's check the send acknowledgement email node. I'm going to open this up. This is connected to my account, obviously, and this is using the variable. And now this is interesting. As you can remember, right, we had this problem before that it is not using the path to the correct email, to the correct node, right? And now it is actually giving us the full path in regards to the recipient address of the first node, right? So this definitely makes sense, and it also correctly named. So let's see if the variables are also correct. Acknowledgement subject. Let's open this up. And this is the acknowledgement subject, right? So also the casing is correct, and this makes sense. Then we have hello name, and thank you for reaching out to us, and so on and so forth. All right, so very simple, but it is definitely useful. Now, let's see in regards to the database. And here you can see that we have the base row configuration that we still need to finish up. And obviously we'll need to choose the correct database where it's supposed to land. And I'm just going to choose this really quickly. All right, so I have replaced and selected the correct name of the database, and then obviously Office table and everything else that it was necessary. So I chose the correct field names, and I obviously have prepared this within my base row account, right? So that everything should match. All right. Closing this one, and now we're going to take care of the Airtable settings. And here again, you can see that when I open up the Airtable node that this is connected to my account, but obviously again, we will need to select the correct base table and then do all the same settings to basically map the columns with the according values. And I'm going to do this as well right now. All right, now I have selected the base and the table, and then I do have the according columns, right, being presented to me right here. And then I can just drag and drop the according fields just exactly like with base row, right? So I have done exactly the same right here using the same variables. However, I'm not going to do this for Airtable right now. I'm just going to deactivate this, and this is also, you know, like really intended because at the end of the day, I wanted to have base row, either base row or Airtable, right? So let's just leave this out, and let's just see what happens right now. Now, so that you guys are aware of the fact, I am going to use some sample data. I'm going to open up the new lead email trigger right here, and I'm going to click on this edit icon right here, and this is what I have prepared earlier, and this is just some sample data what a lead might send me, right, via email. And then I'm going to save this, and then I have pinned the data. And now I can work with the data saved within that trigger node, right? And we can simulate basically what would happen if this was a real flow. So I'm going to run the whole flow, and let's just see what happens. And by the way, all the warning signs and all the to-dos that I had here also disappeared, right? So this is basically good to go. So we are good to test this right now. And but I already got the first error, right? And if I open this up, then you can basically see this is again referring to the same problem that we had before, right? Because as you can see within our to field that we have right here, and here you can see the preview of what it actually used to parse this complete sentence, is that if I open this up, then it's basically using the complete object notation, right? And this is not what we want. It is referring to the first trigger indeed. However, if I open up the very first node where the information should be coming from, as you can see, this from field right here is actually referring to the from object, right? And we obviously want the email address within that, right? So what we will need to do is to close this. I'm going to delete this completely, and then I'm going to drag and drop this again into this one. And now you can see that it was actually missing the dot and then email to refer to this specific string right here. And then it does make sense. And then it can actually use the email address behind this. Now, again, here you can see that it is using the wrong variable again. It is referring to the name. However, again, this is not from, or is not coming from the exact previous node. So again, we have the problem that it is referring to a node which was, or a variable rather, from a node that we had previously, right? And then this doesn't make sense. So if you compare this to what it should actually look like, then this should actually say hello. And then it needs to refer to the from field and then to the name, right? And then it does get referred to the correct value. All right, I'm going to delete this one as well. And then it does make sense to use it again. All right, so let's run the flow again. And now it did succeed, and it also entered the correct base row record, right? And let's take a look into base row. And again, you can see that we do have a new row. However, all the values are empty, and I assume that we have the same problem again. I'm going to open this up, and again, you can see, that it is again referring to the wrong variables, right? So I'm not going to bore you with the same details all over again, but as you can see, the main problem seems to be very often that it is not referring to the correct nodes, right? So same problem. All right, so this was also a lesson learned, and now let's get into the more improved prompt and if this also improves the whole flow. So again, I have a freshly created canvas. I'm going to click on Build with AI again. I'm going to jump into my document, and I'm going to use the improved prompt. And I'm going to start all the way up here, all the way down here. Just paste it right here and send it. All right, so we have our nodes list again. I'm going to move myself out of the way again. And now they're rearranged. All right, and we're done again. So this is already quite interesting, as you can see, since the whole structure is already quite different. And one thing that we all can already notice is that it is using two different AI agents, as you can see. So this is using an extract quality read, right? So and it's basically extracting the information, whether we do have the information if it is a qualified lead. And then we have another agent separate, right? So it's a dedicated agent which is responsible to draft the acknowledgement email, right? And you can argue about this if it makes sense to have two of them, but this is definitely interesting, and obviously this is coming from our own prompt, right? We basically told it to do this, right? So let's take a look at the to-dos, and again we need to enter the base ID, right, and the tables, and then we need to also enter the credentials from base row again. So this obviously makes sense. All right, so let's take a look into the very first node first of all. So this is also using an email trigger, and let's actually take the previous flow side by side. All right, so I have just opened up the second flow, or the first flow we had from our second use case, and this is already interesting, right? So this is quite simple looking, and now we have this one, which looks a little more complex. All right, so first of all, we do have also the same trigger node, right? And this is what we basically told it to explicitly to use the email trigger, right? The IMAP email trigger. Then we have the workflow configuration as well, and then we have the setup of those variables right here. So we have the choice to use Airtable or not, which is a Boolean. Then if we want to send an acknowledgement, a Boolean as well. And then we have the lead source, which is hard-coded as using the email inbox, right? So this is also a specific difference, right? So this is something that gives us the choice whether, and you can also see that depending on which it is taking this route or this route, right? So if we want to use Airtable or base row, and here if we want to send an acknowledgement or not, right? And this is already a little further down the line in regards to the logic, right? If we actually want to use this as a choice, right, as a manual choice, or if this is something that we just told the AI builder to choose for itself, if we don't care if it's using Airtable or base row, right? And obviously at the end of the day, it would make sense to, choose this beforehand and then to tell it specifically what system and what tool you want to use. All right, now we have the agent, and now this again is also interesting because this is now using an AI agent, right? So this is not using the information extractor node right here again, but this is actually using an AI agent. So let's take a look at the prompt. Now open this up, and first of all, you can see that this is the user message. It also opened up the system message. Let's take a look into this one. And this is also quite interesting. You are a lead extraction and qualification assistant for a CRM system. Your task is to extract structured leads, classify the leads, extract the following fields. Yes, very nice. And then return all extracted data by using the structured output parser. This is also quite nice that it's being so specific. And this level of detail might even be coming from the improved prompt itself, right? So remember, we have just used the raw prompt, and then we have used the chatbot, right, from n8n itself, and then had the prompt generated itself. So this might even be coming from there. So this is quite nice. And then we have the user prompt itself. So let's open this up, and this is nothing special right here. Again, we have the reference, right, from all those variables. So we'll need to double check if this makes sense and if this is actually referring to the correct node. And then we have the structured output parser feature. Right? If you don't know what this is basically requiring the specific agent right here to use a specific format for the output so that we can be sure that we know what it outputs and that we're kind of forcing the LLM to use this specific output format in JSON so that we can use it afterwards, right? And that we know what variables to expect and that we can use it in the subsequent flow. All right, so we have the structured output parser right here, which is quite nice. So this is also a selection that you need to undertake manually. It used Anthropic this time, which is also quite interesting. I haven't told it to use this. And then this is basically it in regards to the AI settings, right? So this is the most exciting part usually. All right, then we have a very interesting part, which is the normalized lead data code node. Now, I'm not a big fan of using code nodes too early. Because at the end of the day, n8n is a low-code or no-code tool, and using code, obviously, if you used code, then you can just do anything, right? But it's important that we as low-code builders know what exactly each node does, right? So if the code behind such a code node is too complex and too complicated for us to comprehend, then in my opinion, it doesn't make sense to use it because you will need to know how to debug it, what it does, right? So in my opinion, it is more useful to first of all look for a native no-code solution using the nodes from n8n, obviously. And if there's if there is no option to do this, or if it's like massively more efficient to use a code node to achieve the same goal, then it does make sense to use a code node, obviously, right? So let's take a look at what this looks like. And this is obviously using JavaScript right here. And if I take a look at this, map AI output fields to database schema, then I already don't know if this is really necessary, to be honest. It looks really thorough and it does look repetitive. So this is a good sign that it is, or it does make sense to use a code node and that it is actually not that complicated, but only complex in regards to, repetitiveness. But yeah, so let's just accept this, but if this fails for some reason, then it will be way harder for us to debug it, right? Because this is code at the end of the day. All right, so let's just take this as is. And then we have another if node, then we have Airtable and base row again. And again, based on what we choose in the workflow configuration, this will take this path or this path. And then again, we have the same logic. So an if node, if we want to send an acknowledgement or not, and then it's going to do this as well. All right, so let's take a look into the second agent and the prompt if we want to send an acknowledgement mail. Going to open this up. And now this system prompt again. You're a professional email assistant drafting acknowledgement emails for incoming leads. Your task is to draft a short, polite acknowledgement email confirming the receipt of their inquiry. Adjust the tone based on lead quality, hot leads. This is nice, separating the acknowledgement email according to how hot the lead is, and then keep the email concise and everything else. And then the email should feel personalized and professional. All right, so this is also interesting. And then again, we have the references to the previous notes. All right. Again, this is using Anthropic, and I also want to take a look at the final node. So this is using as the subject the previous subject, which does make sense. Then we have the message and the to email, and it's sending this from a Gmail account. All right, so we do understand all of this, and this does make sense. And as you can already see, this is a little more complex, right? So let's run this and see if this also works. All right, so I just ran this, and to my surprise, this was already successful. Just to give you a little context again, I'm going to open up the trigger node again. I have added some sample data, the same sample data we had before, right? So into the structure, this could be coming from a form or whatever you can imagine. And then we have the workflow configuration, and then we have the actual assessment. Now, something that we didn't take care of before was to make sure that within the output parser, this very structure also makes sense within the whole context, right? So if we are telling the AI agent in this case that we wanted to output certain information, or to extract certain information rather, from this text and then to output it in a certain format, then we will obviously also give it, or we need to give it an example, a JSON structure that it adheres to, so that it works in the subsequent flow, right? And that it knows what to output exactly. Now, as for the normalized lead data, no, this was also successful. So if I open this up, then you can see, and I'm going to toggle our AI builder again, and then we can already see that it is actually cleaning up the data, or rather normalizing the lead data in regards to what we have received from the previous nodes, right? So apparently this code does work. And as I've mentioned, it does not look too complicated because it is quite repetitive. But at the end of the day, you know, if there's a missing parameter inside of this, then it doesn't work and we need to debug it. But other than this, it does look solid. All right, then we have our route to the database. We did choose Airtable. I'm going to open this up. I have not mapped all the acquiring fields that are necessary, but it is finding the correct value. So there is data that is going through. And then we have the send acknowledgement part, and it is set to false. Let me just actually set it to true and see what happens, just to see if the second agent also works. So I'm going back into the very first workflow configuration node. I'm going to choose send acknowledgement to true, and then it will take the second, or rather the first path right here. I'm going to save this and run the full flow again. All right, and now the whole flow was successful. Let's just see what it created. But again, okay, so as you can see, again, we have the wrong association to the previous node. So this is the reason it did not create the actual acknowledgement email, and it has not received the data from the previous nodes. All right, so this is a recurring problem, as you can see, right? So we now had the two use cases. The first one was hard. The first one was easy. The second one was harder. And the recurring problem seems to be that it is not able yet to refer to the exact variables it created itself, right? And that it knows are there. So we had the problem that the path is not always correct, and that sometimes the naming of the actual variable was also not correct. And also in regards to, you know, like automating the whole process, that we always need to manually select the complete database, the complete table, you know, because obviously it doesn't know which this should go to. However, if you look into something like base row and Airtable, or whether it's Google Sheets or whatever, then you also always have IDs within the whole system, right? So if you take a look into the URL of your specific system, right, depending on what it is, then you can see that there's a database ID, that there is a table ID and whatnot. And these are actually hard values, right? And at the end of the day, remember, right, our process was to first of all have a rough draft, right? To use as a starter, right, as a starting point, and then to pass this on to the n8n doc, the chatbot, right? Because this one knows exactly what's happening in the background and knows the nodes by heart, if you will. And we can pass this on, right? So we could expand this very raw prompt to something like use the ID so-and-so for for the selected base row table, right? And then we can use this again to use the correct database, right? So this way we can actually define it earlier, or from the start, right, where the data should actually go. And then the subsequent flow will actually refer to this node and will actually know what to enter into that specific field instead of using placeholders, right? Because this is the very problem that we did not pass on the data what the ID of that specific node will be. So if, for instance, I chose a base row right here, then I open this up, then I could just enter an ID right here, right? And then if there's a matching ID, it will show up here. And this is what we can use, right? And this way, the AI builder will be able to refer exactly to the specific ID and to the specific database and table that you want to choose, right? So knowing these two parts, this can actually massively improve the the speed that we can build flows with, right? There will obviously be a lot of tweaking, a lot of fine tuning, a lot of error checking at the end of the day, right? But still, it is or it can be a massive improvement, especially if you're not 100% sure what node to use, and if you just want to have like a scaffolding, right? Especially if you have a complex flow that you want to automate, right? All right, so this was a rather long video, but I think it was quite insightful. I hope so. If this was helpful, then please let me know so, and let me know if you are using the n8n builder, AI builder actually. And yeah, I first of all appreciate very much your attention and hope to see you next time, and see you then. Bye.